Today, we become legends.
Hey, my name's Inter, and welcome back to Inter Games for yet another God Guide. This time we're going to be covering Khepri, the Hugbug himself. Pretty much solely a support character. You could try and play him in other places, but generally Khepri is going to be there to support his team from support role in Conquest, or just generally being a support in other game modes. And he's got one of the more unique hits in the game, I think. Obviously an incredibly unique ultimate that we'll get to in a bit, but he's a super fun support to play in my opinion, and actually pretty powerful in the current meta. I do think he's a bit underrated. He's been rising up a little bit in terms of pick rate and win rate and stuff. And so I think he's absolutely solid to use in the current meta, and he's a ton of fun. So let's just jump right in with his abilities. So first up, we have Khepri's passive, which is a pretty simple one. It's just every 5 seconds you apply a 2% health shield to yourself and nearby allies. The shield lasts 15 seconds, and the interval is increased to 10 seconds. It's doubled if you take or not dealt damage in the last 5 seconds. So during combat, it's not going to be as powerful. Outside of combat, it's going to be ticking a lot more frequently. And this will apply to yourself and nearby allies. So you can see I'm giving this Ymir a shield. It's not something you really need to pay too much attention to. You know, just at the start of the game, you'll start with a little bit more health for like tanking purple buff or whatever. If you're with your ADC, you can both get that shield, and obviously it will keep refreshing as long as you stay near Khepri. So if you have like a decent shield like this Ymir has, it will just keep refreshing as long as he stays near me. It's not really something you need to think about too much. Just teammates that are nearby, you will get an extra health shield. Khepri's 1 Abduct is a pretty interesting ability. This also goes into his aspect, which we'll get into after going over his full kit, but you dash forward and you grab and pull the first enemy god hit, dealing damage. You also get up to 50 protections based on rank while you are doing this, so you are a little bit more tanky while you're pulling them. But yeah, basically you dash forward a decent distance and then you pull that god. You can turn around as well in it if you want to. Kind of give yourself a bit more of like control over them. You know, if I wanted to pull him like kind of this way, you can like turn him around and pull him next to this Ymir kind of thing. Like you can redirect them a little bit with the pull. But a lot of the time you are just going to be pulling them, you know, away from their team while your team hits them. And it's a pretty long duration CC, especially at max rank. It's 1.9 seconds and it also doesn't DR whatsoever. So even if this Ymir had been stunned twice before I hit him with this, I'm still going to get the full pull duration no matter what. This won't DR. So it can be a really powerful CC. This can absolutely kill people because they're being pulled and silenced, so they can't jump away or anything. Nor can they cast abilities to retaliate. They can basic attack you, so be aware of that if you're doing this on an ADC. It's a pretty long duration. You can right click cancel it anytime you want to. So if you do like kind of dash in, grab the ADC, realize they're shredding you, you can right click cancel it and you know, dodge their attacks or whatever, because if this duration, an ADC can absolutely shred you down in that time. So yeah, you can't just right click cancel it whenever you want to. Okay, next up we have Khepri's 2 Rising Dawn, which is a bit more of a complicated ability than his 1. Basically you roll a sun forward and it's going to deal tick damage to enemies that it hits and give damage mitigation to allies that it hits. And it's also going to reduce the physical protections of enemies hit as well. So yeah, this is an ability that you want to use on both allies and enemies if possible. So like in this situation, I can throw it, my Ymir gets the damage reduction, and the enemy Ymir loses physical protections, takes some damage. At the end of the line as well, it will sort of do a little explosion and reapply the effects after a short duration. So this Ymir is going to take a lot more tick damage there versus if I just did it here and he's not going to get hit by the outer explosion. You can see there's way less ticks there overall than if he is going to get hit by the outer explosion as well as the initial hit. And if you do manage to get both of those hits, it ticks for a long ass time and can actually do a solid amount of damage if you can manage to get them in the right spot where they're going to get hit by the blast afterwards. The blast afterwards will also apply the damage mitigation again to allies. So if you want to hit an ally like that, you can refresh the damage mitigation on them with okay, I missed that. You can refresh the damage mitigation with the explosion afterwards and get pretty long duration on allies with it. And this is a very powerful underrated aspect of this ability. You know, don't just always be throwing it at enemies. Throwing it at your allies can absolutely be really useful because it is a large amount of damage reduction. It's up to 30% based on rank. So if the enemy jungler and solo lane or diving your backliners or whatever, throwing this on them, they're just going to take 30% less damage. It's really powerful. So make sure you're not always just kind of throwing this out on cooldown at enemies. You might want to save it sometimes for if your backline is going to get dived, you can throw this on them and the enemies will be taking more damage, your allies will be taking less damage. It's a really, really powerful ability. It's also really useful for wave clear, which we'll demonstrate here. So like when you're clearing waves in lane, for example, you don't want to just stand at the front of your wave and use this on the enemy wave. You want to try and hit at least your melee minions if possible, because if you do it from here, you hit your melee minions, they get damage reduction, so your wave's getting cleared less quickly, and also you hit the AoE explosion on the back archers as well of the enemy wave. And so this is really the most efficient way to clear. You want to be kind of standing about in this range, you know, in between your minions. Make sure you hit your front ones with the damage mitigation, and then make sure the explosion and the tick damage hits both of the archers as well, like on both of those ticks. And that's going to give you some actually really good wave pressure in lane. You know, your minions are taking less, their minions are taking more, and also you get the double hit on the archer minions at the back when you get that explosion, and it can clear really quickly. And Khepri can actually have surprising amount of lane pressure by doing this, you know, making sure you hit both ticks on those back archers. it can clear the wave really quickly. You can see how much damage this is doing. Obviously, this isn't a normal situation on level 20. But yeah, when used right, this Hue can absolutely be a lifesaver in terms of giving Khepri really good wave clear in the lane. So make sure you're doing it like that in terms of like standing roughly in between your wave, hitting your melees, and then also the enemy archers twice with the explosion is really good for wave clear. So yeah, a little bit more complicated of an ability to use with Khepri too. It will take a bit of getting used to. You know, you kind of want to hit allies and enemies with it if possible. You can also use it for like advanced wave clear tech and stuff like that, but it is a really powerful ability. Make sure you don't sleep on this. Moving into Khepri's 3 though, which is much simpler. This is just a circle that is going to do damage to enemies and root them. It's very simple. It can set up for your 1, which is nice. As I said, your 1 doesn't DR, so this root isn't going to be DRing your follow-up 1, so you can make sure you guaranteed hit it. To be honest, the 1's pretty easy to hit anyway. Even at like a long range, it has a pretty generous hitbox and it's relatively easy to hit anyway, but you can kind of set up for either your 1 or your 2. You could also just like root them and, well, you throw the 2 a little bit faster than that. You can also just like throw the root and then throw the 2 and then they get hit by the root and they kind of like get, you know, stayed in there a little bit. The root is being DR'd at the moment. It's usually longer than this. You can kind of see how much is being DR'd there. But yeah, if you do the 3 into the 1, for example, you know, you root them and then you run up and grab them, the grab isn't going to DR, so that could be really powerful as well, a nice little combo. But finally, for Khepri's abilities, until we move on to the aspect, we have the ultimate, which is Scarab's Blessing. This is one of the most unique abilities in the game. It's most of the reason you play Khepri. And this, the long and short of it is that it revives allies that die while it's under its effects. It does also give them movement speed, strength, and intelligence while the buff lasts, and so you can kind of do a little bit of you know, a mini game for the enemy. You can put this on one of your allies when they're getting low, and then, you know, if the enemy doesn't want to kill them because it'll trigger the revive, they have increased movement speed, strength, and intelligence, so they can, you know, chase down a kill or whatever while the enemy doesn't want to kill them because they get revived. And of course, one of the more major uses for this is of just that revive. You know, if an enemy's getting low, you know, a situation like this, you just put the revive on them. You can revive back to 40% health at max rank. The amount you revive to does scale up from 20 to 40. Also, it's not something I can really demonstrate here, but you will revive at Khepri's location. It won't revive them in place. If Khepri ults himself, he will revive in place, obviously, because Khepri's location is Khepri's location. But if you're ulting an ally, it will revive them at Khepri's location. And so what you can do is, you know, like, you've got pretty good range on this. Let's say Sumir's about to die. I can ult him and I can dash away and then, you know, get more distance away from the enemy so that he'll revive in a more safe location. Because you do only revive at 40% health. You can still quite easily be killed after you've revived from this. But yeah, that's something you can do as well. You know, if that Ymir is in danger, you just ult them. And then as they're reviving, you dash away. And then I can revive them over here, for example, which is like really good. And there's one more final component of this that was added in SMITE 2. Successfully reviving an ally grants you a permanent stacking buff of 2 protections. So, you know, if you get like 5 revives throughout the game, you just have 10 more of each protections permanently, which is not something you need to pay attention to, but you will just get a little bit of extra stats. But with Khepri's abilities covered, let's move into his aspects really quick. So the aspect for Khepri is relatively simple. Basically, your 1, you can't pull them anymore. It will just root them in place, but you deal a few basic attacks worth of damage over the duration. You can see there, I get the initial 174 and I deal 4 basic attacks worth of damage over that time. And this aspect, in my opinion, is just better than regular Khepri. The pull that you would normally get isn't really that valuable. You know, you're kind of keeping them in place already. Pulling them out of position can be useful in certain situations, but the damage that you get from having this aspect on is like pretty substantial. You know, that is more than the base damage of the ability. You know, you're more than doubling the damage of this ability just by taking this aspect, even if you're not building any damage. Already like auto attack synergy. These do count as auto attacks, so if you wanted to do some funny stuff, And so if you wanted to do some funny stuff, like, you know, buying Kin's Size and Bragi's Harp or whatever, this will proc all of those on hit effects each time, and you can kind of do some funny stuff with that. But even on regular support Khepri, when you're not building a troll damage build that isn't viable, in my opinion, this just adds a lot of extra damage to your 1, and you don't really care about not being able to pull them most of the time. Rooting them in place is more than enough for your allies to follow up with damage. And this also gives Khepri some really incredible, like, damage pressure in lane in the early game. You know, between your 2, which if you hit them with, you know, both aspects of it can do a large amount of damage, and your 1, you can actually get a solid amount of damage and be quite lethal in the early and mid game with this aspect. And so overall, I think at the current moment with how it's balanced, the aspect is just better on Khepri no matter what you're doing. You take it in support. If you're trying a troll build in like jungle or whatever, you probably take it as well. But yeah, just turn the aspect on for Khepri. It's just better. That extra damage is more than worth it compared to the loss of like the pull, which is really not that much of a loss. Your allies can still follow up very easily on this just by them being rooted and silenced. But yeah, that is all of Khepri's abilities and his aspect covered. Let's move into his builds. So there is multiple different ways you can go with a support build in SMITE 2 at the moment. Khepri generally just build like a fairly standard support. There's not anything too crazy in terms of like weird items that he might use that other supports would not. Generally with Khepri, I like to go selflessness into heroism. This just gives your allies a damage shield whenever they're hard crowd controlled, and this is really good in my opinion. It's 15% of your maximum health, so if you're building a lot of health in your build, which you often will in a support build, you can end up giving allies a substantial health shield with this. War Flag is the other option, which is more aggressive and grants attack speed and movement speed to nearby allies and yourself when you get minion assist. because this can be good if you want a really aggressive lane, you know, especially with the aspect. Khepri can have a lot of early game pressure between this and the aspect and war flag, and you can run something like that. I do think war flag into war banner is perfectly viable on Khepri if you want a more aggressive start, but I personally prefer the more defensive Khepri with heroism. Being able to give your allies those damage shields, you know, it plays into his like revive aspects and damage mitigation for your allies and stuff. You play a more defensive role. I generally prefer that, but you can go war flag if you want. In terms of first item, right now I would probably recommend Lifebinder. I do think Lifebinder is just really incredible. As I said, Khepri has quite a good aggressive early game with the aspect on, and Lifebinder can just enhance that. Lifebinder, if you didn't know, it just deals damage in a line, marks enemies, and the first ally god to hit those marked enemies heals and shields themselves. And so you can do like Lifebinder into one, you're going to heal and shield yourself and do an absolute crap ton of damage. The cooldown of this item is 15 seconds, so you can use it twice per minion wave. You know, you can use it once to clear the wave and then once to clear a jungle camp, or once to, you know, poke out the enemy god or whatever in combination with like your 1 and your 2. You know, you can just do this, you can root them, proc Lifebinder, go in with your 1. You do a lot of damage in the early game if you rush Lifebinder with Khepri aspect. And so personally, I really like this, but it is a little bit more of like an aggressive option, I guess. So if you didn't want to go that, personally, I do recommend it, but if you didn't want to go that, you would probably just rush something like, you know, a Stampede maybe. This is really good. It's active, give all of your allies nearby a bunch of movement speed to be able to get into and out of fights. Stampede is incredible. It should be in most of your support builds somewhere, usually as a rush. Prophetic Cloak, I also think is viable on Khepri because he does have easy ways to stack it. You know, you'll probably want to go this first item, so you might want to like skip out on the Lifebinder, or maybe you could go Lifebinder into Prophetic. I think that's viable too. So you could do something like, you know, Lifebinder into Prophetic. I think Prophetic is pretty decent on Khepri. He does like the mitigations late game, and he's got a lot of easy ways to proc Prophetic. He can just 3 people from range and not really care and just get a Prophetic stack. He could 2 people from range and get Prophetic stacks very easily. And obviously when this thing is stacked up, when you've hit 20 physical gods and 20 magical gods, you do get a lot of value from this item. This thing's going to be giving you, I believe, 60 of each protections, some cooldown rate, and also 12% damage mitigation if you have 350 or more item protections. Oh, in fact, I lied. In SMITE 2, it's not even item protections, it's just total protection, so your base protections count for that as well. But yeah, once this item is fully stacked up, it's the most efficient defense item in the game. It's going to make you really tanky, and you can stack it fairly easily on Khepri with these pokes. So I do think Prophetic Cloak is absolutely viable on him as well. However, it is very slow. You know, it takes a long time to get online. You're not going to be tanky when you initially buy it. It's not going to give you, you know, a lot of early game pressure like Lifebinder might. So I think Prophetic Cloak is an option if you're having, you know, a slow early game. The game's not really going too crazy. You can go for Prophetic. I think it is really good. I wouldn't say it's like in the main build that I would recommend as like a standard build for you, but you can absolutely go Prophetic, rush it early game if you're going to do that. But let's say you didn't go Prophetic, maybe you just went into something like a Stampede. Screeching Gargoyle is still another really good item in my opinion. This will fill up your last active slot if you did go Lifebinder into Stampede, so you might want to consider, you know, do you need that other active slot for something like a Talisman of Purification against an Ares or whatever. But generally, I think Gargoyle is pretty good, and these will be my 3 active items in most builds. The Gargoyle did get nerfed a little bit. It's only a 1-second silence now instead of a 2-second silence. The tooltip in jungle practice still says 2, but on the live client is 1 second. But it's still a really good item. Just being able to silence enemy gods on commander is just really good. You know, you can maybe go in for your 1 or whatever and then use this straight afterwards, so you can 1 them, and then as soon as that expires, you just pass in your Gargoyle, you silence them again. Gargoyle is really good, and these are generally the 3 active items that I would go in a support Khepri build. Stone of Binding, also close to essential on Khepri in my opinion. He has a lot of good hard CCs. This will proc it from range, and this will proc it as well, and honestly, it's just really good. You know, if you're wanting someone, your allies are going to be following up with damage, and you can just reduce their protections with Stone of Binding. It will also just increase your overall lethality as well. Just having flat pen, if you hit squishies with this, it's going to do a lot more damage. So yeah, Stone of Binding is something I'll probably have in every support Khepri build, probably somewhere in the middle of your build, you know, 3rd or 4th slot or something like that. Then in terms of the rest of your build, it's really just kind of like, what do you need? Mantle of Discord is something that I really like. This got added to the game recently, and it's really good on a lot of tanks in my opinion. If you take damage below 40% health, you just stun all enemies around you and become CC immune, and it's really good for keeping you from being bursted down. You know, if the enemy like Hercules plucks you or whatever and you get thrown into the enemy team, you know, get CC down. Mantle of Discord can proc, stun everyone around you, and then you get a chance to like dash out or ult yourself or whatever. I think Mantle of Discord is really good on a lot of tanks right now. I would probably throw it into this build. And then, yeah, there's a lot of other items you could go for in terms of your last few slots. You know, Spirit Robe is okay, but I think Mantle of Discord fills the same purpose better, in my opinion. Hussar's Wings is really good if you're playing into a lot of slows. You know, Nemesis, Cupid, ult, that kind of stuff. Hussar's Wings can be really good. Ruiner Tank, obviously, you probably wouldn't go this last if you need it. You would go it earlier in the build. You know, maybe you would slot it somewhere in, like, you know, 2nd or 3rd slot if you need it against, like, an enemy Rad, enemy Yamoja, enemy Anubis, anything like that. If you need the anti-heal, you should be buying this. I'll mention Thebes. I don't think Thebes is particularly good in the game right now. I just don't think it's, like, that stat efficient considering you need to stack it. You know, you'd much rather rush something like an active item or a life binder than rush thieves in the game right now. I don't think it's very good. I wouldn't recommend building it, but I thought I'd mention it because I know there are a lot of support players coming over from Smite 1 where Gauntlet of Thieves has been the go-to rush for many years. It's not the go-to rush in Smite 2. You're better off rushing an active item. Beads, obviously, you know, you would need to sack off some kind of active item if you wanted beads in the build, but you know, maybe you need it against an Ares or something, sell the Screeching Gargoyle or whatever, pick up a Talisman of Purification. This is really good. Glad Shield, I think, is also an option if you want a more aggressive build. Khepri actually can be very aggressive in the earlier mid-game, in my opinion. So if you want to slot in a Glad Shield and, like, you know, maybe in place of this Ruinous Ankh, you would get it in, like, third slot or whatever, then into a Binding. This can give you a lot of early game damage. You know, you can maybe even delay your Stampede if you wanted to and go something like this. Life Binder, Glad Shield, Stoner, Binding. You have a lot of damage with this kind of a build if you want a little bit more of a carry playstyle from support. You can absolutely just, like, not necessarily solo backliners, but you can pressure them out and out-trade them by, like, you know, putting this on them, going in with the one, going with the route to proc Stoner Binding as well. Obviously doing your Life Binder somewhere in there. You can actually out-pressure a lot of carries in the early game with this. Khepri can be very aggressive in the earlier mid-game with a build like this. And so I think that's an option as well. You will lose out on some of you know, your team-wide active effects like Stampede and stuff like that if you're going for a rush like this, but it can give you a lot of early game damage and pressure. So I think that's an option as well. I wouldn't say it's in the main build, but if you like a little bit more aggression from your supports in the early game and you're still playing Khepri, Glad Shield can be really good. Hexstone is also an active item that I think is quite good. It's not so great on Khepri, but you can use it as like a way to get in and then one people afterwards because the one won't DR, so you can just go in and then straight up do the one. I think that's actually pretty viable on Khepri. But again, it is an active item, so you're going to be sacrificing something like a Screeching Gargoyle or a Talisman of Purification or something like that to be able to afford this. But I think it can be a nice combo. You know, you can root them and then you can Hexstone in, and this is like a true combo of an insane amount of CC. And because the one doesn't DR, you know, you're not losing anything there. You know, the knockup won't DR, the one won't DR, and you can get like a solid, like, you know, 2 to 3 second CC chain on someone that can be very lethal. I think it's a lot of fun, Hexstone on Khepri. I wouldn't say it's like a main build item, but you can do just some pretty disgusting stuff with it like this and just lock people down for insane amounts of time. So yeah, I think Hexstone is an option. Generally, I would go Screeching Gargoyle over Hexstone, but you can absolutely throw a Hexstone into the build if you want to. And so yeah, in terms of the most generic Khepri build I can give you, it would be like this, and maybe you would throw like a Ruinous Ankh in there somewhere, you know, maybe something like this. Maybe earlier with the Ruinous Ankh, you know, maybe go something like this, I think would be like the most generic Khepri build that I could give you. Generally, most games you are going to need anti-heal, that's the thing. I know I'm saying this is a generic build and it has a situational item in it, but anti-heal at the moment in Smite 2 isn't that situational. You'll need it more often than you won't need it, so I like to include it in the generic builds that I give people. But of course, if you're aware in the current match that you don't need anti-heal, you can sack off the Ruinous Ankh for, you know, maybe a Prophetic or a Spirit Robe or anything else that you need in the build, really. And finally, let's talk about Relics for Khepri. So in general, you are going to want to go with either a Blink or a Shell on Khepri. You can also go Sunder. I think Sunder is also viable if you want a more aggressive early game where you're invading enemy jungle camps and, you know, building stuff like Glad Shield, Binding, Life Binder to be able to out-trade the enemy jungler. That's absolutely something you can do on Khepri with Aspects, in my opinion, just because he does so much damage. You can actually just walk into the enemy jungle with Life Binder, you know, pop it on them, do your one, and just kind of like steal their jungle camps with Sunder and be annoying. That's absolutely something you can do on Khepri. So if you're going to go for that playstyle, Sunder can be viable. Blink is solid in general, just for your way to engage. I don't think Blink on Khepri is as good as it is on some supports because you have ways to engage otherwise by like rooting them and then dashing in. You know, rooting them and dashing in is pretty much just as good as like, you know, blinking on them and immediately dashing. It's not quite as immediate. You know, they might be able to jump out while the root is happening to them and stuff like that and react to it. But I don't think Blink on Khepri is like as necessary. You can also go Shell, in my opinion. Shell is also really good. Obviously, you need this into stuff like your Moja or Odin to make sure they don't pick you because you have no way out of walls. But just in general, Phantom Shell just giving shields to your allies can be good. So yeah, Blink, Shell, or Sunder, depending on how you want to play, in my opinion, for Khepri. Generally, I will go Blink because it can also save you from other situations where like you might be getting picked and you're about to die. You can blink out defensively and stuff like that. So generally, I'll go Blink on Khepri, but Sunder is really viable if you want to go for a more aggressive, like invade the enemy jungle playstyle and just be that annoying support that is constantly in the jungler's face, stopping them farming. That's a really viable playstyle with Khepri, in my opinion. I think it's actually really solid. Just because the insane amount of damage you do, Life Binder being overpowered, Stoner Binding being overpowered, you can kind of like do that playstyle. And then Shell is the traditional, more defensive option. You know, you've got Heroism shield, you've got your passive shield, you got Phantom Shell shield, you got your revive, you got damage mitigation for your allies. You even got Life Binder providing them shields as well. If you don't want to take the Life Binder, an ally can hit them and take the Life Binder. So you can play a much more defensive playstyle with that, and Shell is what I would go if you're trying to play that more defensive playstyle. But yeah, hopefully this has been helpful for you in terms of learning Khepri, some like ability combos and stuff, some build tech, stuff that you can do in the learning phase, what items you want, all that kind of stuff. Let me know down below who do you want to see next for the guide series, and I will catch you guys for another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.